not have the authority to do anything beyond 30 days. And in order for him to get, quote, an extension, he's got to get it by Congress. And in order to do that, now, of course, they got the majority in the Congress, but they do have issues about the fact that this has to be debated. People's got to hear what's really going on. It's time for facts to be brought before the people. And so those of us who are in opposition know what's really happening. Isn't this another reason why your fight and the fight that California and New York and everybody else is beginning to engage in to stop this redistricting, rigging is so critical, right, Ron?
Absolutely, Barbara, and that's what brings it home. When you paint a picture of why you need representation, it is precisely so you have a voice that has a vote and a way to fight against this type of authoritarianism. And you have also a vote and a voice that fights for representation and resources for communities of color, vulnerable communities. So that is why this crystallizes exactly why we need a seat at the table, why representation matters, why, it goes back to the beginning, when people were no taxation without representation. We're going back to taxation without representation because they're essentially taxing the people, but then trying to take away their vote, their voice, by taking away their representative, hacking and cracking black and brown districts in order to rig the system so they hold on to a very slim majority in the House. This is all about power, and they will trample upon the rights of citizens by any means. President Trump is also talking about a new way of using the census to not count non-citizens, which is
my Lord.
This mid-decade redistricting, for those who don't know, is not normal. You don't mid-decade redistrict. You don't do a mid-decade redistricting just at your whim, no matter who's president. If this was President Obama or Biden, I would be saying the same thing. This is not the way we do things. And they people will be screaming bloody murder if they try to do it, if Obama tried to do it. So this can't be acceptable. And we cannot, just because it's President Trump and you happen to be a Republican, go along to get along, because that means that you're on the wrong side of history. I don't think history would judge this generation. They would say, what were you doing when this president was doing all these things? Just like they do when they look back and say, was Hitler? What were you? Were you calling out, or were you allowing it to happen? I think there's too many people that are allowing this to happen, allowing Trump to take us to a military state. Well, I don't live in D.C. I don't live in Chicago. I don't live in New York. But as Dr. King once stated, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And just because it's not in your neighborhood today don't mean they ain't coming for you tomorrow. That is why we have to rise up if they're ICE raids, and I'm not of Hispanic or other origin. Because just like they came for this group today, I may be on the menu tomorrow. So that is why I'm hoping people will say, yes, it may not be in my backyard, but it's in my best interest because we're Americans. We're Americans, and this is not the America that we should be living under.
And Dr. Omekongo.
I got to get this one in, Barbara. Dr. Dibinga,
I got to get mine in too. Go ahead.
Listening to what Representative Reynolds is just laying out, I think of the District of Columbia. I think of, the kids. I think of the communities, having the National Guard, the DEA, the FBI, the ICE agents, all these folks that are in there trying to oppress them, suppress them, and address them and go in front of them. And they don't even have a representative in Congress that can vote as to whether or not this should be extended or not, as is required by the D.C. Home Rule. Can you speak to us about, if D.C. was a state, it would have its congressional representatives and its senators be able to at least weigh in on the argument and vote on that decision. They don't have that because they're not a state.
Yeah, man. Anybody, drive through D.C., see their license plate taxation for our representation. And quite honestly, we're talking a lot about, Trump, who deserves everything we're talking about. But, one of the reasons we're not a state is also the fault of the Democrats. Because whenever Democrats have had control of everything, they didn't see D.C. as necessary to be its own state. And so there's certain things that are happening right here that could have been prevented. And the fact that, we have a shadow senator, not a real senator, no voting representation as it relates to Congress and the like, this is the reason why Trump is able to get away with what he's been getting away with so far, because he can't just call up the National Guard to come through places like Baltimore and other places like that. That's why you see the governors are offering those services. But we don't have that right here. And just like you see, Trump is very selective with the National Guard because he didn't call them out for hours on January 6th. So, we have that, this criminal who had a real crime scene, here in D.C. do absolutely nothing about it. And so, what Trump has exposed in this country is that in many ways, when it comes to people like him with his status, we don't have laws. We have norms. Right. And if you just have a guy who comes in and says, I don't care about the norms, then he's going to do whatever he wants. So part of the norm was D.C. was just going to be a city where it's just not going to have voting rights. Traditionally, that's just never how it's been done. And now we're suffering the consequences of that. But there's always been a movement and a fight for D.C. statehood. And the people who have problems with what they're seeing right now, they need to join that fight as well so D.C. can actually become a state and have its ability to actually govern itself and not go down with situations like this. Democrats have had multiple opportunities to do that, and they never did. And now we're reaping the consequences of that.
All right. And Dr. Omekongo, can you also talk to people about the authoritarianism? I mean, folks have been, some people, as you've been responding to them, have been saying, oh, I feel safer because I see troops in the streets in D.C. and this should be an opportunity for further dialogue about how we could have these other intervention strategies that, please, Mr. Trump, listen to us. We can, work this out. There's been all these madness, just these these voices of opportunism and these voices that have been heard in our city. But when I look at what's happening, I see Bantu stands, right? I was in South Africa where Bantu stands were real. Folks, those were where they took all the black people and basically wherever they lived, they set it up where it looked like a concentration camp. They had these big lights. They had these patrols at night, these automatic curfews, all of this stuff. And that's where they're going, folks. South Africa is their model. The old South Africa is their model. This is the reimposition of, white supremacist rule, but also it's authoritarianism at its worst. So you've been trying to teach people that you got to understand the era that we're in. Do you want to just, in our remaining minutes, can you just give people just an overview of why this is so important that you understand what we're really dealing with?
Every authoritarian place that has existed in the world, there have always been free people who've walked around in authoritarian states because they thought they were free because they were appeasing the dictator. The fact of the matter is that people never see that they're in an authoritarian state until it comes to their door. Daryl brought up, Nazi Germany, all these other places, or someone else brought it up, people saying, I was just doing my job, or I was just working for this company, I was just doing that, I didn't think it was a big deal, I needed the income, so on and so forth. When the sister Ramesa Oster at Tufts University got arrested by one of those ICE agents, one of the guys in the truck just said, who was mad, said, hey, I'm just doing my job. And that complacency is how authoritarians get over. Look at what Trump is doing with the universities. There are no liberal arts universities in authoritarian regimes. That is why Trump is targeting them. When you look at the detention centers, the concentration camps, that's happening. That's housing black and brown peoples, not just brown Latinos, and there's black Latinos as well. There's Haitians and African Americans, picking off different parts of the population. So when it's time for the large fight, there will not be anybody to fight back. Look what's happening in our schools. What's the other thing the authoritarians do is they control the education and the media. Trump is now partnering with Prager University, or PragerU, that fake non-accredited quote-unquote university, to create cartoons to put in schools to rewrite the history for America on its 250th anniversary. Trump is changing the writing and the history that's coming out of the Smithsonian, targeting museums. exams there to make sure that it's talking about him favorably. This is what authoritarians do. But here's the scary part. When I listen to, all of it's scary, but when I read and listen to authoritarian scholars like Tim Snyder and some of these other ones who know this stuff in and out, the one thing they all say is that they've never seen an authoritarian regime move this quickly. They have never seen one move this quickly. Some of the stuff Trump has done in 6 months, Putin took like 3 years to do. Putin and like some of these other folks. And so people really need to get on the good foot and be mindful that it's just a matter of time before they're coming for you. And he's trying to make Americans too divided, and also with his tariffs and all of this other stuff, too poor to actually think about fighting and helping the other because they're so focused on themselves. And that's how he's getting over. When we come together, bullies back down. And he is back down on several things. The more of us need to stand up for each other. It's like Lyndon Johnson said, I learned at a young age, if you can convince the poorest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't realize you're picking his pocket. Give him someone to look down on and empty his pockets for you. Trump has built his whole brand on tearing other people down and giving poor whites other people to look down on, and they've been supporting him to this moment, and we got to turn them around as well so that we can have the army of peace and justice that we need to win this war.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Ron Reynolds, your parting words to our audience in 1 minute.
Do not be dismayed or discouraged where you give in and throw up your hands. Continue to be engaged. Continue to fight back. When we fight, we win.
Amen. And Donald Whitehead, your parting words in 1 minute.
Absolutely. I think that, every religious doctrine talks about us taking care of those that are less fortunate, the poor and the marginalized. We have to do that now. Our religious bodies, our civil rights bodies have to be focused on this. And just connecting the dots really quickly, the group that really is pushing the demonization of homeless individuals comes from Texas. The person who is leading that effort is a group called the Cicero Institute, led by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is from South Africa, and he sits right next to President Trump as an advisor. So this is not, and he's also been tied to private prisons. So this is not anything that's a coincidence. We are seeing authoritarianism in action, and in all those other regimes, they started with the marginalized population.
Thank you. Daryl, as you get ready to take us home, I just want to do a shout-out of thanks to everybody who showed up on Saturday to fight the Trump takeover rallies around the country. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Daryl.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you to Dr. Omekongo Dibinga for being with us today. Thank you to Representative Ron Reynolds out of Texas, who's fighting the good fight there. And thank you to Donald Whitehead, the Executive Director of the National Coalition for Homelessness, for being with us today. Folks, I tell you, authoritarianism grows in silence. We have got to open our mouths and get fed with democracy. We've got to be certain that we're objecting, that we are dissenting to what's happening. Do not comply. We've got to push back. That moment is now. You've got to get off the sidewalks, get into the streets, get into some good trouble, and protect our interests. Until next Tuesday, noon, Eastern Standard Time, peace, everybody.
Peace.
Peace.
Paid for by Barbara Arnwine. You've built something real, a business rooted right here in the DMV. So why risk your whole budget on search and social ads? Putting your business on the air right here on this station, reaching real customers has never been easier. Our AI-powered ad manager is fast, affordable, and puts you in control. Reach real people. Get real results. Go to Urban One on tap and use promo code INTRO10 and get 10% off your first campaign. Keep it real with Urban One on tap.
News Talk 1450 and 95.9 WOL with the Carl Nelson Show. Weekdays from 6 to 10 a.m. Reverend Al Sharpton, 1450 WOL, Washington, D.C. 95.9 W240DJ, WMMJ HD3, WDCJ FM HD3, and worldwide at WOLDCnews.com. The views and